So I just saw the new movie Strangers Chapter 1. And I have to say, while this movie does have some low ratings currently online among critics, I still enjoyed it. Let me explain why. So, The Strangers Chapter 1 is directed by Rennie Harlin, who has also directed other sequel movies like Die Hard 2, Exorcist the Beginning, and Nightmare on Elm Street 4, among others. So, the plot of this movie is very similar to what we've seen in the original two Strangers movies, where we see a couple going on a vacation and they end up staying in an Airbnb in a home they're not familiar with, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And they start to notice strange things about their environment. They start to notice these strange masked people who are staring at them, knocking at their door, toying with them, harassing them, and eventually attacking them. So it's a very similar plot to what we've seen in the previous movies and just takes place with slightly different characters in a slightly different setting. And while this movie is very similar to the original two movies in the Stranger series, this movie acts as both a prequel and a reboot to some degree. And this movie actually acts as a start to a whole new trilogy in the Stranger series. And we're going to see the next iteration of this movie later this year. I was really surprised to hear that the next sequel is coming out in the same year, but that's exciting based on how this movie ends. And I'm not sure when the third one in the trilogy will come out, but I'm excited for both of these follow up movies for sure. So, one of the things I really love about the Strangers movies so far is even though they are obviously low budget type horror movies that use very commonly used scare tactics like jump scares, the Strangers movies do so with perfect timing, which is rare in horror movies. And they find ways to surprise you that you're not expecting at all. There's too many horror movies where you can predict everything that's going to happen and see every scare coming. But with these Strangers movies, you think a specific thing is going to happen a lot of times, like a masked person is going to jump out at one of the main characters at a certain point, and then typically when you're expecting that, it doesn't happen. There's many times where you think something bad's going to happen, and then the masked people just walk away or something like that, or it ends up just being a friendly character that's coming into a room. And what they also do is when you think everything's going well, all of a sudden there'll just be an attack out of nowhere or a surprise out of nowhere when you're least expecting it. And so this movie does really well with actually surprising you and scaring you when you're not expecting it, compared to what we see in many other movies. There's other movies I enjoy, like the Scream movies, for example, but I find that those movies are a little bit more comedy based, where this is something where they're actually trying to scare you effectively. And so I really appreciate that. Also, while these movies are pretty low budget, I think they are very effective with how they use their budget. So they usually find a pretty decent set for these movies that is convincing, where it's kind of like a house in the middle of nowhere or a place in the middle of nowhere and in the middle of some woods. And then the costumes are always very great. While they're simplistic, usually just some masked people, they have some really creepy masks they use in these movies, and this one was no exception. And so I really appreciate how they make the setting of these movies feel. Even though they use like older cars and stuff, it kind of goes along with the aesthetic of the movie. And so that's another thing that I've really enjoyed about these, is how they kind of set up the whole setting of the movie and link it together with the plot. And while I did enjoy this movie, not everything about it was perfect. So one of the things that was odd in this film was how this is supposed to be a prequel to the original Strangers movie that came out in 2008. And the main character in this movie drives a brand new BMW that can be unlocked with his smartphone. And they mentioned the house that they end up staying in this movie is an Airbnb. Now, this is odd because back before 2008, we didn't have these features in cars. The BMW in this movie is obviously not made before 2008, and Airbnb wasn't really even around before 2008 either. So that was a little bit of a mistake, in my opinion, of how they put together the plot of this movie, wanting it to be a prequel, but then putting in these modern things into it. So I think it would have been better if they wanted to incorporate those elements to just say this is a whole new separate franchise or something like that. But it's just kind of odd how they structured it. Also, while I appreciate them keeping some of the effective elements from the original Strangers movies in this new one, I think that they could have added a lot more new elements to enhance this film and the formula that it has. And I especially wish they would have explained more of the backstory of this series more. That's something I've been wanting throughout watching all of the movies is more explanation of the characters and the backstory. The trailer made it seem like this was going to be the case, where they marketed this as a prequel where we would learn more about the characters and where they came from, but instead it just felt like another rendition of the same movie with the same plot and the same specific things that happen. I mean, in this movie, we see a girl knock at the door asking for someone named Tamara again. We see that she unscrewed the light bulb again on the front porch. We see that she came back multiple times. We see the same masked characters. There's just so many things that happen the exact same way in this one. Even the ending is very similar to the ending we saw in the last movie. And some of the questions I would really like answered from this series that I hope they address somehow in upcoming films is, who are the masked strangers? What is their backstory? Where do they come from? And why do they start, doing mass murder essentially? And in addition to that, we see in multiple movies these two kids on bicycles wearing white and passing out religious pamphlets. And I'm curious to learn more about what this religion is, why they're doing that. They're almost setting it up with this movie and some of the previous ones where, like, maybe there's some local religious cult in this town where the strangers are, and maybe that's supposed to be part of the plot of the movie, but then they never really introduce that as a part of the movie. They just have these kids on bikes handing out these pamphlets, and there's no explanation or reasoning why, except to maybe they think that's going to make the movie a little bit creepier. And so in addition to that, I hope they just, in general, in the future films, offer more of a backstory to this whole franchise, because if they just keep making essentially the same movie over and over again with different protagonists or different people who are getting attacked, it's going to wear out eventually to where people aren't going to care about these movies anymore. I like how classic movies like Halloween, while essentially all those movies are very similar in Michael Myers just attacking people with a knife, there's still a little bit of a continuous story where they reintroduce the same characters from previous movies and they're consistently trying to take down Michael Myers. I think this movie needs more of a continuous plot like that, and I think that's what they're trying to do with this new trilogy, but I really hope that they start to expand on this universe more in the upcoming movies. Otherwise, I could really see this series dying off, which is unfortunate. So if I were to rate this latest Strangers movie, I would give it a 7 out of 10. While it wasn't a perfect movie, I do think it deserves much better than the ratings it has been getting so far from critics online. It is still an edge-of-your-seat thriller horror movie all the way through and offers some great thrills. When I was in the theater, I saw kids covering their ears and eyes. I saw middle-aged guys jumping in their seats watching this movie, and you don't see that with every horror movie nowadays because of how predictable they can be. I just saw the movie Tarot recently, and that was a much worse horror movie that you could predict every single thing that happened, and when I watch this movie, in contrast to that, it's so much better. And I've always appreciated all of these Strangers movies in their own way, even with how all of them are very similar. And so if you have seen this movie already, let me know your comments on the movie in the comment section below. And if you haven't seen it yet, let me know if you're planning on seeing it. And make sure also that you hit the like button, subscribe button, and notification bell down below to stay updated on my latest videos, because as new movies like this release, I'll be reviewing them, and I'll keep putting videos up about collecting physical media as well. But thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I'll see you in the next one.